Welcome to Fix It Home Improvement, covering projects that every homeowner should know and great products for home and garden.
Hi, I'm JC, and this is where we share weekly home improvement tips. I'm here with my co-host Cindy.
Hello, JC.
Hi, Cindy. Today we're going to be talking about attic insulation. We'd like to thank Crazy Jake for giving us a 5-star rating and review on iTunes. It wasn't until 1932 that fiberglass was invented.
Really?
It was actually by accident. So these researchers were trying to make airtight seals between glass blocks, and they were using molten glass. A jet of high-pressure air hit that molten glass and spun this into these really fine fibers. And originally it was trademarked as Fiberglass in 1938, so they didn't have two S's. Like they do now. It wasn't as fancy. And fiberglass does have some hazards, so it's very popular, easy to use, but when you inhale these particles, it can cause coughing, nosebleeds, definitely cause respiratory problems. OSHA requires that fiberglass insulation now carries a cancer warning, so you want to make sure that you're always wearing at least a particulate filter that's marked N95. In the 1940s, they developed polyurethane spray insulation, so like the Great Stuff insulation. That was developed by the military for airplanes.
Didn't we talk about that already?
I don't know. We talk about so much stuff. If you have a home that was built in the 1930s or earlier, you may have knob and tube wiring, so sometimes it's just called K and T wiring. And these are exposed wires that are just held to the studs and joists with these porcelain tubes. So the wires will pass through joists, let's say into your attic, through these porcelain tubes, and then they're nailed down on the studs, and it keeps the wire off the stud or away from everything, because it actually is using air to keep the wires cool rather than really good insulation like we use now on wires. And so the National Electrical Code does not allow loose, blown in, or expanding foam to cover any of these K and T wires.
Which makes sense.
Right. But what's funny is there's been research done, and there's a couple of communities around the country that do allow you to put certain types of insulation over this knob and tube wiring. So in general, I would be very careful, but you can check with your local inspector and find out if there's any insulation that they approve. I saw one research study saying that just boosting the insulation in your attic from R11 to R49 can save you about $600 a year in heating and cooling costs, depending on what part of the country you're in.
That's huge.
The Department of Energy says that you can cut your heating and cooling as much as 40% from their research just by insulating the attic and stopping airflow into the attic.
Crazy.
For this podcast, we're mainly talking about unfinished attics.
Right.
So you would want to check your attic insulation depth and then look up your zone. So it's going to be, you have different zones like 1 through 8, and find the recommended R value for your insulation.
What does R mean?
So that's how much a material is going to resist heat moving through it. So for example, like 1 inch of solid wood is considered an R1. 1 inch of fiberglass is a little over 3. And 1 inch of blown cellulose insulation is a little over 3 also. So it's better. The bigger number, better.
Okay.
Just like if you give us a rating on iTunes, bigger number, better.
So if you purchase a home and it's an older home, how do you know if you need more insulation?
So you're just going to measure the depth. So if 1 inch gives you an R3, in fact, you can go to EnergyStar.gov, and they have all the recommended levels of insulation. They have a graph, which is kind of cool. The minimum R value in a hot climate is an R30.
Okay.
So if 1 inch is of fiberglass, let's say, is R3, 10 inches deep would give you an R30. In a temperate zone, it's R38. And then in cold areas, they recommend a minimum of R49. But there's a lot of the pros that say if you're in cold climates, you should have at least an R60. So you're looking at like 20 inches of insulation. So it's kind of easy. You just measure, again, math.
Yay. So I would say if you're in a cold climate and you have icicles hanging down from your house, that's a good indication you need more insulation.
Right, because your roof is melting So if heat is moving through your attic, you don't have enough insulation, it's melting the snow. In fact, one indicator is if the snow on your roof is melting faster than the snow on the ground,
Right.
there's too much heat in your attic. So your attic should be cold. You've got vents all around your attic that should keep that as cold as the outdoor temperature. So those ice dams are formed and icicles are formed if the snow starts melting during the day, and then at night it gets into your gutters. It freezes as a block of ice, and then that ice can get underneath your shingles and do damage, and can also damage the wood. You can rot away the wood.
Well, I've seen it where icicles have been from the top of the roof all the way to the ground.
Right.
And just like a sheet of ice
Right.
hanging off. And my parents' house, they put that new addition on the back of their house, and there's not enough insulation back there
Right.
in the new
Interesting.
part.
Yeah.
So they
different
have
areas.
Yeah, so the rest of the house is fine, but on that side of the house, in the new part, there's icicles that hang off the
Right.
roof.
So in fact, if you have like a split level home or something with a couple different areas in your attic, and you can have a couple completely separate areas, check both to make sure that the depth is deep enough. And this is a pretty common problem with homes built before 1980, having very little insulation in the attic.
What are the different types of insulation?
So you have bats, blown, and sprayed. Those are the three most popular. And with bats and roll insulation...
So bats with two T's?
Right. The most common for bats and roll is fiberglass, mineral wool, plastic, and natural fibers. So plastic insulation, they actually make it from recycled plastic bottles. And the cotton bats are made from recycled jeans.
Really?
And then they have sheep wool bats.
No way.
And I couldn't find out whether they use merino wool or
Well,
not.
of course they would.
And these are packaged in rolls in a variety of widths and thicknesses. Usually for walls, you've got 16 to 24 inches to fit in between the joists or studs. With bats, they're usually 48 inches to 93 inches long. And then for attics, they have rolls that are 18 feet to 70 feet long, which is pretty cool, so it's easy to apply. They come with or without paper or foil on one side that creates a vapor barrier. And in your attic, you're only going to be using unfaced insulation.
Does it matter what color you're using? Or it's
Different,
just-
different companies have. It's like Owens Corning, they trademarked the pink color. It's funny to trademark a color, isn't it?
Right, but like when I think of insulation, I think pink.
Yeah.
I don't know why, but doing a good job with their marketing.
Yeah. The rolls are really good for attics with little or no insulation. You can put them in between the joists, and then if you have the joists filled with insulation, it's really easy to run these perpendicular over the tops of the joists, and that's going to increase the amount of insulation.
I guess that's one question that I have is, where are you putting the insulation? It's going in between the joists?
So initially you want to fill in between that space between the joists, and you want to go all the way up to the top of that, and then you're going to, well, two things. One, if you're using rolls and bats, you're going to roll these perpendicular to those bays that you filled. If you have blown in, then you're just going to add depth till you get to the depth you want. If you're using rolls, you want to snug them up to each other because you don't want any space, but you don't want to over compress them. When you compress insulation, it loses R value.
That's weird.
If you run into an obstacle, like say an electrical conduit, the roll insulation is really nice, especially like fiberglass, because you just cut it and wrap it around that, so it's very easy to use. Another type of insulation is blown-in insulation, and the main types are fiberglass, mineral wool, and cellulose. And cellulose is made from recycled newspapers, and so manufacturers will add these minerals to make it insect and fire resistant. And then what's nice is there's a lot less material in landfill.
Right.
And so you're insulating your attic with this. And all manufacturers of blown-in must produce up to the Federal Consumer Product Safety Commission standards, so for safety and quality. And these come in compressed bales, and it gets broken down into really tiny, fluffy pieces in an insulation blower. So you drop it into this blower, and it kind of breaks it up. It blows it through these corrugated tubes that you go up through your access panel, and you take this hose with you. Then it puffs it up, and then you're able to blow it into any area you want. So it really works nice, especially if you have an odd-shaped or regular attic and there's a lot of obstacles to work around.
So does this go a lot faster?
It's faster, and usually it's less expensive. So and it's nice you don't have to crawl into the corners like you have to do.
But you do have to rent a machine for this.
Right, yeah, you have to rent the machine. And then we did this in one of our older, I don't know if you were at our one store when we did this in the attic. So in one of our older...
It was BC before Cindy.
So in this old building, it was probably 70 years or older, we went up into the, because I mean, our heating costs were really expensive in the winter. So we went up into the attic, and there were areas where there was no, I mean, you just saw the drywall from the ceiling below. So we rented one of these machines, and we went up, and it was actually a lot of fun. So we started in one corner and worked our way towards the hatch, and then started in the other corner, worked our way towards the hatch, and we filled this thing. It made a substantial difference in our heating costs, and it was very easy to do. The third type of insulation is spray foam insulation, and this is expanding foam, like you get in the little cans.
Right.
If you want to completely fill the void between joists, it's usually a professional job, but there's kits that you can get, and the pros call it flash and bat, so for a homeowner doing it themselves. So you can get these tanks, or you have sometimes these big bottles with a nozzle. You're going to remove all the insulation in these bays between the joists, and then you're going to spray a very thin coat. They want you to have about an inch worth of this insulation, and this is going to expand into cracks and crevices. It's going to block air movement, water vapor, and then you're going to put your insulation to whatever depth you want on top of it, and they say it does an excellent job of insulating.
Interesting. Do you have to be careful, like with regular expanding foam when you're using this?
Yeah, there's different types, specifically for like the attics, and they have open cell expanding foam, which is actually like an R3 for an inch, and then they have closed cell foam that's an R6 per inch. So depending on the chemicals that they use, you have to really look at the label.
Okay, well, I didn't actually finish my thought or my question.
Well, I answered the first part of the question.
So like regular expanding foam,
Right.
where you can't use too much because it becomes too big.
I don't think that's a problem because you want it deep. So,
See, so that was like my question.
Oh, no, don't worry about it, Sandy.
Thanks, Stacy.
And then just fill over it to the depth that you want.
Okay. Can you over-insulate?
If you put in so much insulation that it's so high that you're blocking the air movement, so if the air vents or on the soffits, depending on the type of air vent you have in your attic, but yeah, you can definitely start blocking air movement, which we want in the attic. And you don't want to insulate the roof rafters because it can potentially rot the wood on your roof.
What are the steps if you're going to insulate your attic?
So the first step is stopping any airflow, especially if you're using blown insulation because air moves through that. And then it's drawing out the conditioned air in your house. So it's actually, like in the winter, it's pulling cold air into the living area, and then it's sucking out the heat into your attic. So we want to seal any air movement. So any cracks and crevices, we want to use silicone or caulk for a 1/2 inch crack or smaller. So around your plumbing vents, recessed lights, wiring, ducts, flues, bathroom exhaust fans, anywhere where something punches through the floor of the attic.
Right.
For larger cracks, let's say a 1/2 inch to 3 inch, you'd use some type of expanding foam. What's interesting about the Great Stuff has a big gap filler.
Right.
Their 16-ounce bottle, they say one can is equivalent to 24 tubes of caulk.
Wow, that's crazy.
DAP has an interesting expanding foam, and this was rated very high for attics, and DAP, D-A-P, they have something called Draft Stop, and they have it in 2 types of containers. One is a one-time use small container, like a typical expanding foam. And then they have these large containers that you use with this applicator gun, and you can add onto the end of this gun either a real tiny nozzle to get into tight areas, or you can put a flexible hose on it. It also has a cleaner for the system to keep the nozzle clean, so once you use it, you blow it out.
Because that's the problem with any type of expanding foam cans is it's a one-time deal.
It can be a mess. Although some of the new chemicals, they're saying they do a better job of cleaning. Actually, talking about cleaning up like Great Stuff and expanding foam, Jake, who gave us the tip last week, he also said that Great Stuff makes an acetone-based cleaner for cleaning up expanding foam before it cures, so it's real sticky before it cures. I mean, it's almost impossible to remove. But
Have you ever got it on your hands?
Yes, and it has to wear. It turns dark, and and then it weeks later until it rubs off. Now, around flues and chimneys, you can use high temperature caulk. You don't want to use spray foam or regular caulk. Most building codes require that you have 1 or 2 inches of space between the insulation and either your chimney, a flue from your furnace, or your water heater. And so you can create this barrier with aluminum flashing, which a lot of people use. So you can cut half circles out of 2 pieces of aluminum that fit right over the space between the joists, and then seal this together with high temperature caulk. That way you can block out any of the air movement. You can build a box or a circle around the flue or chimney using aluminum flashing by bending the bottom out, and then you can hold that in place with caulk, and then you're going to bend the top down. So you're almost making a Z shape,
Right.
and that's going to keep insulation from falling against the flue, and you want to make sure it's at least 2 inches away.
Don't you have to wear some kind of protection when you're dealing with insulation?
I guess that should have been the first step.
I would think so.
So if you're moving insulation to seal air gaps and you're adding insulation, I would be wearing goggles to protect my eyes, especially with fiberglass. You don't want to get, these are actual fibers of glass, so you don't want to get in your eye. I would get a mask, N95 or better, with 2 straps, so it's going to keep you from breathing in these particles. You want to use gloves, a hat, or a paint hood, like a sock. Ever seen? Those are great. For a couple of bucks, you can get these. It's almost a hood. It covers your whole face, and your eyes show, and it does a really nice job of protecting your hair and your head. I would definitely wear work clothes because you're going to get these fibers in your clothes, long sleeve shirts, long pants, and then you can also, at the hardware store, you can get disposable coveralls.
Right.
So it just covers everything for like $10, maybe a little more at a hardware store. I would use a 5-gallon bucket if you're moving blown insulation to get to the gaps. So you would pull off this stuff, pour it into a 5-gallon bucket. You're going to caulk or use foam, and then pour it back in. It might be easier if you have a piece of plywood to kneel on, and then either knee pads or a kneeler, like a cushion for your knees. Another thing you want to be aware of, houses built between 1919 and 1990
That's a big gap.
can have vermiculite insulation that contains asbestos. Amazing, huh? So this looks like very small little lightweight pellets. And if you have that type of insulation, you probably want to get a pro who's trained to work with this.
Are you going to explain what vermiculite is?
So this is a naturally occurring mineral, and when you heat it up, it expands 10 to 30 times its size.
Outrageous.
So it's really lightweight, it's fire resistant, odorless. It's just a great insulator. But the problem is the main producer of vermiculite was in Montana, and they found out that there was a deposit of asbestos in this mine, and it contaminated most of this vermiculite. So these are really tiny little pellets. It's almost dime size or smaller. So you want to leave these undisturbed. If you're worried that it might be vermiculite, you'd want to have a pro come and take a look at it. You know, they also use perlite in some homes. So this is volcanic glass. So these are smaller particles than vermiculite. And when they take perlite, they heat it up to 600 degrees, it pops, and it expands up to 20 times its size. So this, again, is very lightweight. It's a real good insulator. And it also is a good soundproofer. Perlite has not been found, any of it, to contain asbestos.
Well, yippee. Aren't vermiculite and perlite, aren't they plant foods?
For soil amendments? Yeah, because they absorb a lot, or they hold a lot of water. If you have electrical boxes in your attic, you want to make sure that you're sealing with caulk or foam. If you have recessed or can lights, you want to make sure that you keep insulation about 3 inches from the can. And again, you can create a barrier with aluminum flashing around the can. Or if you're going to be using bats, you can use wire mesh to create a barrier so that nothing gets close to the can lights. They have a couple of covers now that you can use. Owens Corning has this smart cap light cover. It's triangular shaped, and it has a little vent hole on the top, and that's going to increase your insulation. Tenmat has a recessed light cover, and that's Tenmat, and this looks like a flower pot turned upside down. And this is a fireproof cover, and they use spray foam to hold it in place, but this does a really nice, this was rated very high. The Department of Energy says that recessed lighting can be 50% of the energy lost through your ceiling.
Wow. Is it really worth it to have lights in your ceiling then?
Yeah, I'm not a big fan. If you have ductwork in your attic, you're going to want to seal everywhere where it goes into the living space. And then turn on the system and feel all of the seams and find any leaks. One tip is sometimes you can see little dark spots wherever there's air movement, dust and dirt. So that's one way to look around your ductwork and see whether there might be a leak. And then you want to seal the ducts with caulk or duct seal. We talked about that last week, that putty that creates an airtight seal. It's either called duct mastic or duct sealant. Traditional duct tape actually does a very bad job because the glues dry out and fall apart. So it's actually not the best thing to use on ducts.
Who knew?
Duct tape.
I should rename it.
If you're using blown insulation, you're going to want to build a barrier around the attic door, so you can use foam boards or rigid insulation and create this barrier so that it doesn't fall in when you open the door to go up to your attic. You can also put foam weather strip around the door where it meets the stops, and you can get insulated door covers now that have zippers to get into the attic, so it insulates and it stops air movement. There's also a new product coming out called Hatch Stuffer from Insulation Innovators.
Right.
So that'll be interesting. We'll have to.
It looks like a big pillow.
Right.
So it stops air movement from escaping through your door.
Yeah. One of the key things you need to do before you add insulation is use roof vents or insulation baffles to keep insulation from blocking the soffit vents where the attic meets the roof.
Right.
Because you need to have that air movement from the outside. It has to flow. You want that attic to be the same temperature as the outside. And so most of these are going to be stapled in place to the insulation that you have in your attic. So whether it's rolls or blown insulation, you can add blown insulation to the top of that to get to the top of the joist if needed, and then you can lay rolls of insulation perpendicular to the joists, or you can just blow insulation till you get it to the depth you want.
Okay.
If you plan on blowing in insulation, so you're going to rent a machine and you're going to have that machine underneath the hatch, you're going to want to go up with this hose and start with one side. So you're coming in your opening, you're going to start at the end and work your way towards the hatch, and then you'll start from the other end and work your way towards the hatch, and that's all there is to it.
Because otherwise you're going to box yourself in the attic.
Yeah, you'll have to swim through it. If you're working with fiberglass and it itches, you don't want to scratch it because it can drive that glass particle deeper into your skin.
So this is like if you get it on you?
Right. So you want to rinse and wash right away with soap and water, gently rubbing it. You want to shower immediately. When you're done, wash your clothes separately from your other clothes, and then most pros recommend a rinse cycle before you put your regular clothes back in.
What are some top-rated companies?
So CertainTeed, CertainTain, capital Teed, Owens Corning, and Roxul, Roxul, were three of the top-rated companies.
Well, I think you should spell Owens Corning.
Owens, 2 words, Owens, Corning, Corning.
Do you have anything else to add?
I would say the key things are don't block the vents in the attic. Keep the insulation at least 3 inches away from can lights, 2 inches away from your chimney or flues, and then just make sure you're wearing the proper gear.
I gotta say, I'm pretty disappointed you didn't mention ancient Rome, ancient Egypt.
Next episode.
No,
I'm going to go heavy.
Oh, great. Let's wrap this up.
You can subscribe to our podcast on iTunes or Stitcher.
If you enjoyed it, please leave us a review.
You can check out our home improvement videos on our YouTube channel, Fix It Home Improvement.
And you can subscribe to that as well.
We sent the book to the editor, book 2.
Finally.
So, yeah, my chapters took a little longer than Cindy's chapters. And I'm sure they're going to be the most edited chapters, too. If you want to talk to us, you can email us at fixitpodcast@gmail.com.
Thank you for listening.
Talk to you next week.